And we're back. You're listening to the Talking Boxing with Billy C show. Glad you could join us. Don't forget about my book, man. I'm not going to let you forget about it. Get a copy now. It's up on Amazon. So just search Tom Molyneux. And the title of the book is Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to the Baddest Man on the Planet. So, and while you're at it, follow us on Twitter, too. We're trying to get 10,000 followers. We're halfway there, more than halfway there. But right now it's time for
Blast from the Past. We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Top-ranking Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time. Look at that left hook.
Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
And this week's Blast from the Past is being brought to us by KOFantasyBoxing.com. Check it out, www.KOFantasyBoxing.com. And this week's Blast from the Past features a former world champion and boxing Hall of Famer, Eugene Criqui. And I think I'm pronouncing his name right. And joining me right now to tell us all about Eugene Criqui is my man Alex Perpali. What's up? What's up? You know, you got me trying so hard that I'm making it worse with the name. I know it. I know I am.
It's awful, Billy D. Yeah, pure Pauli. Yeah. What can you do?
Yeah, I know, man. I know. I know it's pure Pauli, right?
Pure Pauli.
Pure Pauli.
Pure Pauli.
Oui, Pauli.
Pure Pauli.
It's pure Pauli. Pure Pauli. Alex is good. Alex is good. You see, that's why I shortened my name to Billy C. I can't even pronounce my name either. But anyway, it started yesterday, and it's been like haunting me ever since. But anyway, Eugene Criqui, interesting cat, huh?
Yeah, interesting guy. I don't have a lot on him though. It's kind of light on this blast. I think that kind of happens when you have some of the old timers with a lot of fights over in Europe. Who he only had he didn't start fighting here until later in his career, and then so I wasn't able to find too much. He only had a couple of fights here actually. I think only 2 his whole career were in New York. The rest were all in France. And some of those questions you had asked me last week when we spoke, I do see that he does become a referee. But BoxRec only has him refereeing 3 fights in his later in life. But yeah, Eugene Criqui, I think it's Criqui, how you pronounce it, Criqui. Was born August 15th, 1893 in Belleville, France, which I believe is outside of Paris. He was only 5'3.5", and he fought at flyweight and moved up to featherweight. He was, this was definitely one of those. He was very popular in France, and he started fighting as a pro around 17 years old in 1910. Then World War I interrupted his career. So he ended up going off to fight World War I, and he was actually it didn't really interrupt his career. I'm not sure if it's strange because when you look at his career, I'm not sure where you kind of squeak it in there, but he ends up being in the Battle of Verdun, which was a battle in World War I, which is one of the most fierce battles in human history.
Yeah.
I didn't know too much about it. I guess it lasted 300 days, and about 300,000 people died. And this was World War I, so you're talking trench warfare. One of the things that was really dangerous about the trenches is they, would just be, their heads would be sticking up every now and then to take a shot at your enemy. There was shelling, crazy amounts of shelling in this battle. A lot of times, guys, when they'd stick their head up, they'd get it blown off, or bullets would come skittering across, the ground, and there'd be horrific facial injuries. This was really one of those maiming sort of wars, and that's exactly what happened to Criqui. He was hit by a sniper's bullet in the jaw, nearly took his jaw off. but they were able to reassemble it. And in some of the earliest plastic surgery, I mean, that was where plastic surgery made a lot of advances in fixing some of the injuries in World War I. This battle was in 1916, actually. So it's like right in the middle of his career. It's very, very odd to think that.
Well, the World War One. I just want to say this. First of all, it was a pretty extensive surgery that he had. They fixed it more than once. And you're right. You wonder, how this affected his boxing career, because from the accounts of the injury, it was just that his jaw was shattered, and they originally replaced it with a silver plate, which was replaced by, like you said, the beginning first generations of plastic surgery, which made him, bearable to look at. But to talk about World War I real quick and the style of this war, this was like when governments were doing the orders. Hey, today we're going to hold this area, and you had these guys from, obviously it was a world war, from all these different armies, dug in, like you said, in trenches. And for the length of this war, not only were they shot sticking their head up, but they would order these attacks where one side would all of a sudden just climb out of their trenches and move forward 10 feet and lose, hundreds of guys, and then the next day they would retreat that 10 feet because the other guys did. It was kind of crazy stuff. And I've seen a lot of footage of some of these injuries, and you're 100% correct. There was never more facial injuries in any war than World War One. People got their faces shot. As a matter of fact, that's when they started coming out with the hard helmets. A lot of the armies were putting out the hard helmets to try and help protect them from, the shrapnel and stuff like that. Plus, sprinkle in the germ warfare that they were doing. They were all shooting toxic gases at each other, and these guys were tunneling and living like rats with the rats. I mean, the conditions were terrible in World War One. They really were.
Oh, absolutely, and that was the thing about it that was so amazing. Even to today, that whole area, and we're talking about an area. They say that it's about as big as the city of Paris. In Verdun. Parts of it are still like hazardous waste dumps because there was so much shelling going on, and a lot of it, this was where the first germ warfare, the first biological and chemical warfare was in World War I, and they had shells full of arsenic that they would fire at each other. So those shells are still there. There's incredible levels of arsenic in the soil. There's unexploded bombs there. There's barbed wire still there, but yeah, you're right. That charge is very famous. Whenever you see those World War I movies, a lot of times the guy, one of the commanding officers, will blow a whistle, and everybody goes up over the thing, and the other side would just wait with their machine guns and mow people down. It was horrific. And I'm sorry, I lost my place in my notes earlier. It was 1914. His last fight was in July against Charles Ladeau, where he actually lost in the 12th round, and then the World War I took place, and he actually spent 2 years recovering as the jaw was reconstructed. And it's interesting because I think today, I'm not sure, a guy would fight. I guess depending on where, maybe a facial reconstruction is different than a skull reconstruction, because, of course, we remember the example of Alvin Ayala, who I believe had a small piece of either plastic or something put in his head after a motorcycle accident, didn't he? That was a problem why he couldn't fight in this country.
Wait a minute. You're talking about Edwin Valerio, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did I say that?
No, you said Tony Ayala. I was like,
wow. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Edwin Valero. Yeah. I was thinking of other criminals.
That's terrible.
Criminal boxers.
That's terrible because today happens to be
criminal boxers.
Today happens
I upgraded him to a murderer and suicide. He was just a rapist.
Today I'm actually talking about Edwin Valerio. He won one of his titles on this day in boxing history. But
Oh, really?
yeah. Imagine that. Imagine you cutting up poor Edwin Valerio. Hey, actually, you thought that he was.
I think that was a problem of why he couldn't fight in the States.
That's correct.
Well,
He wouldn't pass the head scans. Any state that required a head scan, they wouldn't let him fight. But
so I guess this must have been different because it was in the jaw.
But then again, they weren't doing head scans, and
That's for sure. They didn't have a CAT scan.
Yeah, they were also letting the guys fight every other day under different names. So I mean, the rules were a little looser than they are today. There's no doubt. So what's a little shrapnel in the face going to do? That's not going to stop. A German bullet still left in your cheekbone. So what? Let him fight. But he did have some good fights, and aside from the ones he had in the war, this whole referee thing's got me all. We'll get to that in a minute, but he took over 2 years off after the injury, and then he avenge the fight that he lost just before he went in with the same guy.
Yes, he did, and I think they were a little heavier at the time, and they both were a little older. But he did avenge that fight with Charles Ladeau, and he stopped him in just one round. So that was nice. Back in 1922, actually, a few years, after he returned. He returned in 1917.
Now you know how we're always looking at fighters' resumes and stuff, and this guy certainly has a lot of very experienced fighters on his resume that neither one of us have ever heard of. But he's also got a collection of guys that we would crucify him for fighting today. I mean, in the middle of his career, 0-1 guys, and with very bad losing records and stuff. So I mean, it wasn't like he didn't have those layup fights.
Right, and it was. I mean, he's definitely a regional favorite. I mean, he was a popular guy in France, and he fought some fights in Australia because again, Australia was another big hotbed of boxing at this time last century, and eventually when he did come to New York, it was against a big name, Johnny Kilbane, who was the featherweight champion of the world, and he hadn't lost in, I believe it was 11 years, but he was getting towards the end of his days of fighting, and this was a huge event, very much like a lot of the other fights in that day, where you had, the papers would they'd do reports from training camps, and you could literally follow in the newspaper every single day what was going on, and that's just pretty cool. We don't really I mean, now you can go on Facebook and follow the fighter, but then I don't know. There's something a little more interesting to see it like that. They even talked about Babe Ruth was at the Johnny Kilbane fight, but yeah, he ends up beating Kilbane. Criqui stopped him, knocks him out in the sixth with a big right to the jaw, and they said that the crowd was hushed because Kilbane was really, I mean, he was a dominant guy that sort of stunned them. But then the sad thing for Criqui is he only held the title for less than 60 days. I think it was 54 or 53 days.
Yeah, and when he lost to Johnny Dundee, and his visa must have been wearing out, But the win, the win over Johnny Kilbane was pretty big. Johnny Kilbane had been the world champion for over a decade, and nobody thought that he was going to lose that fight. And he fought both of those fights to win against Johnny Kilbane, and then like you said, a month later against Johnny Dundee, both at the Polo Grounds, which was where the Brooklyn Dodgers played in Brooklyn, New York. So
yeah, can you imagine that atmosphere? I mean, that's I don't know. I talk to my brother about this a lot because we like different shows and movies we watch. He always says he can't stand period pieces. But I tell you, this World War I period, to me, is a fascinating period because it really was. It was this age of empires, and the world was really starting to become modern, and travel had changed dramatically. We were able to get around the world quicker. The ships were faster. I mean, the wars themselves, there's always advances that happen in wars, as horrific as they are. There's scientific advances and stuff like that. And this was a fascinating time. And I just can't, I would just love to see what that atmosphere was like at big fights like that. There is a little bit of footage. It's very short, but there's a brief bit of footage of the Kilbane fight and a little bit of Johnny Dundee. And Dundee was a fun guy, because he was the one who had that really that leaping, bouncing sort of style where he almost used the ring as an apparatus.
Well, Eugene Criqui was described as a guy who could change his style in a fight, and I'm not just meaning like going from a righty to a lefty. A lot of reports on him was that he was considered one of the slickest boxers of his era, but then all of a sudden, in an instant, he would change his style from being a slick type boxer into a crowding, mauling, punching machine, which is kind of strange. You don't really see them change like that. You might see a boxer, move around, maybe change his delivery a little bit, but not go from, being a finesse fighter, a slick fighter, an elusive fighter, to all of a sudden a guy right up in your face. That kind of interested me a bit.
Yeah, that does seem like quite a departure to become, such a different type of a fighter. But I did see that it seemed like in some of the fights, because he did make a comeback, and when he fought Panama Al Brown in 27, I mean, after the fights with Danny Frush, he lost to him, and then he lost to another guy named Carlos Uzabega in Argentina in 26. And then he hung it up. Panama Al Brown, he fought in April of 1927, and that was a really big event in Paris. So he was still popular. And remember, Panama Al Brown, we had done a blast from the past on too. He was a guy who was very popular also over in Europe, and specifically in France. And that fight, they said, was it wasn't since the days of Carpentier that they saw, such a fashionable crowd. And in the fight itself, Brown really dominated Criqui. And one of the things they did mention in terms of his style, Bill, and this is something that I wondered how much if maybe this affected that idea that he would change every now and then, is they said it seemed that he favored his jaw. So I wonder if maybe it would act up if you caught it, if you nailed it right or something. It certainly looked, I mean, in Bert Sugar's book, he describes it as like a gargoyle look. It was clear that he had that reconstructive surgery, but I didn't read anything that it was giving him chronic pain, but I would imagine it might.
I would think that it would be a target. I mean, there's no doubt. And that fight against Panama Al Brown was at the Velodrome, and that was a hot spot for the big fights. You mentioned Carpentier. I believe he fought there a couple of times, and that was a big place for fights. One thing I want to say, you're right about. See, I like watching old movies that focus on an era. I just happened to have been watching something the other day, a really old Spencer Tracy movie before he was even famous. And it was like actually Bette Davis was in it with him, and she was young, so it was a long time ago. And they had a shot of the old train going up the Hudson, right? He was being dropped off to Sing Sing. He was the movie is called 20,000 Years at Sing Sing, and they show footage of the train going along the Hudson. And I swear to God, and even Grand Central Station, I picked out Grand Central Station in 2 seconds. Grand Central Station and the tracks along the Hudson have not changed from the time that they filmed that in probably the 30s to this day. I mean, it looks the same, which is amazing to me that there's still, it still looks just as crappy today as it did back then.
Yeah.
The train. I mean the train tracks and stuff. It's not exactly along the Hudson there. It's a pretty nasty place. But anyway, I figured I would throw that in. But he did come back, like you said, in 1927, and fought that Panama Al Brown fight. He followed that with another fight, and then closed his career in 1928. With a win, and decided to pack it up. But his career was clearly over. His last 7 fights, he only won 2 and lost 5. And considering that for his whole career, he only lost 16, to think that 5 of those losses were in his last 7 fights, it goes to show you that he was pretty damn competitive throughout his career up until the end.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things that they even mentioned in the Dundee fight, was that even though he was getting absolutely dominated by just this whirlwind that was Johnny Dundee, he was just incredibly game throughout, and it got to the point where his eyes were swelling and everything, and he just gave one of those just incredible efforts. And they talk about what a marvel the fight itself was. And yeah, it was that Gustav Humery fight in 27. I did see a write-up of that, and boy, it sounds like he was really pummeled. They said they actually say in this article that this was from the New York Times. Criqui's defeat partly may be attributed to his rebuilt jaw, which was struck by Humery after the gong had sounded at the end of the first. Criqui stiffened and staggered to his corner where he passed out, but was quickly revived by his seconds. And he eventually, think about that. He passes out in his corner, he's revived, he goes back, and he fights another 5 rounds.
I know. We're all giving, myself included, giving Paulie Malignaggi all the credit in the world for taking his beating, and then he cried wee all the way home, but and he didn't have reconstructive surgery. So I don't know. I think the fighters were tougher then, but I'm also glad that the commissions protect the fighters today a little better too. But anyway, as far as after his boxing career, I thought that he did a lot more in the refereeing arena than apparently they're saying, and I can't believe that there's 2 Eugene Criquis, right? I sent Charlie Fitch a book on this guy claiming that he refereed 1,000 fights.
Yeah, maybe a lot of them were amateur fights because, or maybe just sort of smokers or something in France, because according to BoxRec, because you can look up referees, he has only 3 fights that he did: 1 in 31, 1 in 24, and 1 in 23. So 2 of them actually took place while he was still active as a fighter. But yeah, I don't know. It's strange. It shows his picture. It says boxer view Criqui as. It says view Criqui as a boxer. You can click either one.
I gotta ask Charlie, because I actually didn't read the book I sent him. So anyway, what about anything else? I couldn't find anything on him as far as his later life. He did die in 1977.
Yeah, that's all I got was his New York Times obituary is pretty sketchy. It just says, he's a Frenchman who held the featherweight title for less than 8 weeks in 23. He died at his home near Paris at age of 83.
Yep.
And then it just gives some facts from his life. But so I don't really know what, other than that referee credit. I don't know what he went on to do.
Jeez, poor Alex. You didn't even know did he have any drug or alcohol problems? Did he end up on the street? Did he have to tangle with a couple of newsboys? We don't know any of that.
We don't know.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's just a mystery. All right, who did you put him up against in the Title Bout Championship computer game?
Okay, so in the title bout game, I put him in there against the three guys who are
Mo, Larry, and Curly,
arguably-
those three.
Yeah, there's three guys who are arguably tops at featherweight right now. That, of course, would be in no particular order. Nicholas Walters, Gary Russell Jr., and Vasyl Lomachenko. So first I put him in with Walters. The first time they fought, Criqui actually outboxed him. Just a straight unanimous decision, 3 scores of 115 to 111. I then had them fight 100 times, and Criqui did get the better of things. He won 56, lost 32. They had 12 draws. He was able to stop Walters 16 times. Of Walters' 32 wins, 25 were by knockout. So, but we know that because Walter's a big puncher. Against Gary Russell Jr., he actually stopped him at 131 of the ninth when they fought the first time. He dropped him with a single right hand. That was the only knockdown of the fight. Stopped him at 131 of ninth. And then when they fought 100 times, Criqui gets the better of things. 59 wins, 33 defeats, 8 draws, 13 wins by knockout. Of Russell's 33 wins, he also scored 13 knockouts. And then against Vasyl Lomachenko, I had them fight the first time, and Lomachenko, this is sometimes happens with the fight, Lomachenko won an 8-round DQ. And then I had them fight 100 times, and Lomachenko got the better of Criqui. Criqui won 39, lost 46, and there were 15 draws with 12 knockouts by Criqui. And of Lomachenko's 46 wins, he scored 23 knockouts. So of the three of them, Lomachenko seems to match up best with this old-timer.
Interesting. And for anybody out there that doesn't know about the Title Bout Championship computer game that Alex puts these simulations together, check it out. We have a link up on www.billycboxing.com, and it's a cool game. You can simulate, put fighter against fighter from any era and make some different adjustments. It's not a videographic type game. It's not great graphics, but it's perfect for what we do. And I love when Alex breaks those down. I don't know if you've noticed, and I never like to promote other stuff, but BoxRec, which is the record. It's not official records, but it's a pretty handy tool. They've changed their thing around. I don't know if people have noticed it or not, but I'm looking at Eugene Criqui's BoxRec right now, and they list the age as if he were alive. If he was currently alive right now, he'd be 121 years old. I figured I would throw that in at you, Alex, just in case. He.
Yeah, they got to do something about that. I wonder, because the other day I was looking at somebody. That seems like it just changed. That maybe they're trying to get the bugs out of that, because I was looking at someone and it showed when they started their pro career, because you notice when it shows now, it has 2 dates. It has their birth date, and then under it has their date they started their pro career.
Yep.
And it shows their age at that time, but then it wasn't showing their current age the other day, and now it's showing age even for dead people.
Yeah, so he's 121, but he was a former Eugene Criqui was a former world featherweight champion. He had a career record, 101 wins, 56 by knockout. He had 16 losses throughout his whole career, in which he was only stopped 5 times. He had 16 draws. He was only 5'4", 5 feet 4 inches tall. He fought in a total of 132 fights. He went 1,122 rounds with a 42% knockout ratio. It was pretty good. Like we talked about a few minutes ago, Eugene Criqui died on March 7th in 1977 at 83 years old. He was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2005. Eugene Criqui is our blast from the past this week. And Alex, great job as usual. And as usual, I'm going to ask you to stick around for a few minutes, and we can talk about some other stuff. You got some time to do that?
Sounds great.
All right, we'll be back in 2.